Hi guys. Tonight we begin in the candlelit study of a medieval physician. The room smells of dried herbs and old parchment. Bundles of Valerian root hang from the low ceiling beams. A clay pot sits warm near the hearth. On the table, a leather-bound manuscript lies open, its pages dense with careful, deliberate handwriting. This physician, a man who has spent 40 years studying the human body and its ailments, is writing about a condition he calls vigilia, wakefulness without rest, the inability to sleep. He does not consider it a modern problem. He does not consider it inevitable. He considers it a treatable condition, a curable one. And what he writes in the margins of this manuscript, what he recommends to patients who come to him hollow-eyed and desperate, is something that has almost entirely disappeared from the modern world. Not because it stopped working, because we forgot it existed. Tonight, as you lie here and let the world grow soft around you, we are going to follow this medieval physician through his understanding of sleep. We are going to uncover, one by one, the forgotten cures that the Middle Ages developed for the very condition that so many of us struggle with tonight. The ancient world was not ignorant about insomnia. If anything, it understood it more clearly than we do. And somewhere in the gap between then and now, the knowledge was lost, buried under centuries of industrial schedules and electric light and screens that glow in the dark. But it was never destroyed. And tonight, we are going to find it again. So dim your lights now, if you haven't already. Let your body grow heavy. Let the day release its grip on you. Slowly, gently, the way a hand opens when it finally decides to let something go. And listen. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening right now, drop your location and the local time in the comments. I love seeing where in the world people are tuning in from. Now, let us begin. There is a mainstream historical fact that surprises almost everyone who hears it for the first time. Medieval physicians had a name for insomnia. Not just a description of it, not just a complaint recorded in passing. An actual medical term, a recognized condition, and, most importantly, a body of documented treatments that medieval healers prescribed, tested, and refined over centuries. The Latin term most commonly used was vigilia, from the same root as the English word vigilant, wakefulness, being on watch when you should be resting. It appears in medical texts across the medieval period, with a consistency that suggests it was not a rare complaint. People struggled to sleep then, just as we do now. The 11th century Persian physician Ibn Sina, known in the medieval West as Avicenna, dedicated substantial sections of his monumental medical work, the Canon of Medicine, to sleep disorders. His writing was translated into Latin and circulated widely through European universities and monasteries for centuries. In it, he described insomnia not as a character flaw or a spiritual failing, but as a physiological condition arising from specific identifiable causes. Too much heat in the body, too much cold, excessive worry, overeating before sleep, pain, loud noise. Each of these, he argued, had a corresponding treatment. The problem was not mysterious, it was manageable. You only needed to know how. Imagine yourself now walking through the streets of a medieval town at dusk. The year is somewhere around the 13th century. The buildings lean toward each other across the narrow lane. Candles flicker in the windows overhead. The smell of cooking fires and damp wool and something herbal and green drifts from a house at the end of the lane. This is the house of the town healer. A woman the townspeople call Marjorie. They come to her with all manner of ailments, and in the colder months especially, they come to her with this particular one. I cannot sleep. I lie awake for hours. My mind will not quiet. Marjorie listens. She asks questions. She examines the eyes, the tongue, the colour of the skin, and then she reaches for her remedy box. What she reaches for, and what she knows to do with it, is the core of what we will explore tonight. Because Marjorie's remedies worked, not in the vague, superstitious way that modern people sometimes imagine medieval medicine working. Not through placebo alone. Many of them worked in ways that modern pharmacology has now confirmed, centuries after the knowledge was buried. The forgotten cures are real, and the first one begins with something you may already have in your kitchen cupboard. Historians debate the precise extent to which ordinary medieval people had access to formal medical knowledge. Physicians trained at universities, at Bologna, at Paris, at Salerno, were expensive, and their services were largely available only to the wealthy. But what is not in dispute is that herbal knowledge was widespread at all levels of society. Women like Marjorie, healers, midwives, herbalists, carried enormous bodies of practical knowledge. It was passed from mother to daughter, from healer to apprentice, from village elder to the next generation. And much of that knowledge concerned sleep. Archaeological excavations at medieval settlement sites across Europe have confirmed the presence of medicinal herb gardens attached to ordinary domestic dwellings. At sites in England, France, Germany, and Scandinavia, soil analysis has revealed the traces of deliberately cultivated plants. Plants that had no culinary use, but well-documented medicinal ones. Among them, again and again, the same names appear: Valerian, hops, chamomile, linden, lavender. Every one of them with effects on sleep that modern clinical research has now validated. The medieval world knew what it was doing. It simply didn't know why. You sit now in Marjorie's house, in the warm amber light of the late afternoon. She has given you a low stool near the hearth. The floor beneath your feet is covered with dried rushes and something green and fragrant that you cannot quite identify. The smell is complex, earthy, slightly bitter, faintly sweet. The smell of plants that have been gathered and dried and stored and used. On the shelves that line one wall, clay pots and leather pouches and small wooden boxes stand in careful order. She knows where everything is without looking. She moves through this room the way a person moves through a space they have inhabited for decades. She fills a small pot with water from the jug near the door. She sets it over the fire on an iron trivet. Then she reaches for a bunch of dried roots. Brown, fibrous, pungent with a smell that is earthy and sharp, almost unpleasant, like damp soil and something wilder underneath. Valerian, she says. She breaks a small amount of the root into the water. Then she adds something else. Dried flower heads, pale green, with a faint sweet smell. Hops. Then a handful of small yellow flowers. Chamomile. And finally something pale and cream-coloured, clustered and delicate. Linden blossoms. She stirs the pot with a wooden spoon and covers it. She will let it steep until the colour deepens. This is not a complex preparation. She has made it hundreds of times. She knows, because she has observed it in dozens of patients, that it reliably helps people sleep. She does not know about GABA receptors. She does not know about valerianic acid or methylbutanol or apigenin. She knows only that the remedy works. Here is a mainstream historical fact that sleep researchers find genuinely remarkable. The 4 primary plants that Marjorie has placed in that pot, Valerian, hops, chamomile, and linden, are the exact same herbs that modern sleep medicine has studied most extensively as natural sleep aids. And in each case, clinical research has confirmed that the medieval healer's observation was correct. Valerian root, Valeriana officinalis, contains a compound called valerianic acid that acts directly on GABA receptors in the brain. These are the same receptors targeted by prescription sleep medications like benzodiazepines. But unlike those medications, Valerian does this without the same risk of dependency or morning grogginess. Multiple randomized clinical trials have confirmed that Valerian reduces the time it takes to fall asleep and improves sleep quality, particularly in people experiencing anxiety-driven insomnia. The medieval world had been using it for exactly this purpose since at least the 9th century. Hops, Humulus lupulus, are best known today as an ingredient in beer. But long before they were used in brewing, they were used medicinally. Hops contain a compound called methylbutanol that metabolizes in the body into compounds with demonstrated sedative effects. A study published in the journal PLOS One found that hop preparations significantly improved sleep quality in a randomized trial. When combined with valerian, which Marjorie routinely did, the effects appear to be synergistic. The 2 plants work together more effectively than either works alone. Medieval herbalists had noticed this combined effect centuries before the research confirmed it. Chamomile, Matricaria chamomilla, contains a compound called apigenin that binds to benzodiazepine receptors in the brain. Again, the same system that prescription sleep medications target. A clinical study published in the journal Phytomedicine found that chamomile extract significantly improved sleep latency and sleep quality. Postpartum women who consumed chamomile tea showed markedly better sleep and lower levels of depression-related symptoms. The medieval healer who reached for chamomile was not guessing. Linden flowers, from the tilia tree, known in many languages as lime flowers, contain multiple flavonoids with mild sedative and anxiolytic properties. They are still widely used in traditional herbal medicine across Europe today. In Germany and France, linden tea before bed remains a common folk remedy, passed down continuously from the medieval period without interruption. Marjorie lifts the cover of the pot and checks the color. Satisfied, she strains the liquid through a piece of coarse cloth into a ceramic cup. The liquid is dark amber, slightly cloudy. The smell has changed. Less sharp, warmer, something that sits between medicinal and comforting. She adds a small spoonful of honey, not for sweetness alone. Medieval healers understood that honey had its own properties, anti-inflammatory, mildly antimicrobial, and in small amounts, gently calming. The combination of bitter herbs and honey created a preparation that was easier to accept, both for the body and for the patient. She hands you the cup. It is warm between your palms. The steam rises gently, carrying that complex smell. You bring it to your lips and taste something that is difficult to describe, earthy and slightly bitter, with the honey softening the edges. And underneath it all, something that smells faintly like the forest floor after rain. She speaks while you drink. Not about the herbs specifically. Just talk. The kind of calm, unhurried conversation that fills time without demanding anything from you. This is also, you will discover later, intentional. There is a curious detail found in medieval medical manuscripts concerning the administration of sleep remedies. Healers were advised not merely to prepare the remedy, but to administer it in a specific way, quietly, calmly, without urgency or alarm. The 13th century Italian physician Taddeo Alderotti, whose treatises on medical practice were studied across Europe, wrote that the manner in which a remedy is given matters nearly as much as the remedy itself. A patient who receives treatment with confidence and peace is more likely to respond well than one who receives the same treatment in fear or haste. This is, remarkably, exactly what modern psychologists call the therapeutic alliance, the relationship between patient and healer, which research has consistently shown to influence treatment outcomes independently of the treatment itself. Medieval physicians understood the psychological dimension of healing insomnia long before psychology existed as a discipline. They knew that the cure was not only in the cup, it was also in the room, in the calm, in the quality of attention given to the person who was suffering. Historians still debate exactly how widespread herbal sleep medicine was across medieval society. Some argue that formal herbal knowledge was concentrated in specific communities. Monasteries, university-trained physicians, dedicated healers like Marjorie, and that ordinary people had limited access to sophisticated preparations. Others point to the evidence of herb gardens excavated at ordinary domestic sites, to the folk medicine traditions documented in household manuals and church records, and to the sheer consistency of herbal knowledge across geographic regions. The same plants used in the same ways in medieval England and France and Germany and Scandinavia, suggesting a body of knowledge so widely shared that it had become part of the cultural fabric. What both sides agree on is this: the knowledge was real. It worked. And at some point after the medieval period, through the rise of pharmaceutical, medicine, through the Industrial Revolution's disruption of traditional practices, through the severing of knowledge chains that had passed from generation to generation, much of it was lost, not all of it. Herbal sleep medicine survived in folk traditions, in grandmother's remedies, in the dried chamomile sold in health food stores today. But the confidence with which it was practiced, the systematic understanding of which plants worked and why, the integration of herbal medicine into a broader understanding of sleep, that was lost. And tonight, in the warmth of this imagined healer's kitchen, you are finding it again. You finish the cup, set it down. The warmth from the drink spreads through your chest, down into your stomach. Something in your muscles loosens slightly. Nothing dramatic, nothing sudden. Just a gentle easing, as if the body has received a signal it was waiting for. Good, Marjorie says. Now, there is something else you need to understand. The herbs alone will not be enough. You also need to understand what your body is trying to do. She pulls her stool closer to the fire. Your body is not broken, she says. It is confused. And there is a difference. This, it turns out, is the second forgotten cure. And it may be even more important than the first. Before the medieval physician could treat insomnia effectively, he had to identify it correctly. And this is where the medieval understanding of sleep diverges most radically from our own. The modern concept of insomnia is defined against a specific standard: the 8-hour consolidated sleep block. You are supposed to fall asleep quickly, sleep uninterrupted for approximately 8 hours, and wake feeling refreshed. Anything that deviates from this pattern is considered a disorder. The medieval physician did not share this standard, because in the medieval world, the standard was different. Sleep, as medieval people understood it, and experienced it came in two parts. The first sleep, prima somnio in the Latin texts, first sleep in the vernacular records of France and England and Germany, began soon after dark and lasted somewhere between 3 and 5 hours. It was typically the deeper sleep, the most physically restorative portion of the night. Then, naturally, the sleeper would wake. This was not considered unusual. It was not considered a disorder. It was not even considered remarkable enough to comment on, which is why it appears so casually in so many historical sources, mentioned in passing, as one mentions that the weather was cold or the bread was good. Not noteworthy, simply the way nights worked. During this waking period, which might last anywhere from half an hour to 2 hours, people engaged in quiet activities. They tended the fire. They prayed. They spoke softly with others who were also awake. Some worked on small crafts by firelight. Some simply lay in the dark in a calm, drifting state that was neither fully asleep nor fully awake. And then, without effort, without anxiety, they returned to sleep. This was the second sleep, often lighter than the first, often richer in dreams, and it lasted until dawn, or close to it. A quirky detail, preserved in many medieval household records and private letters, is how casually this waking period was incorporated into daily life. A 15th century English merchant, writing to his wife about a business matter, mentions that he composed his thoughts on the subject during the quiet between his first and second sleep. A French noblewoman's diary records that she spent the midnight waking hours in prayer and quiet reflection. A German monastic rule specifically schedules a period of religious reading for monks who wake between the night offices, not because they should be awake, but because it was assumed that some of them would be. The physician historian A. Roger E. Kirsch spent decades studying pre-industrial sleep patterns before publishing his findings in a landmark study. He documented hundreds of references to segmented sleep across European history, in medical texts, in literature, in legal records, in personal diaries. The evidence was so consistent and so widespread that he concluded, for most of human history, until the rise of artificial lighting in the 19th century, sleeping in two parts was the biological norm, not a disorder, the norm. Imagine a person lying awake at 2 in the morning in the modern world. The first emotion is almost always the same. Anxiety. I should be asleep. Something is wrong with me. I cannot afford to lose this time. Tomorrow will be ruined. This anxiety then makes it harder to return to sleep, which confirms the fear, which deepens the anxiety. A loop that those who experience it know all too well. Now imagine a person lying awake at 2 in the morning in a medieval longhouse. The first thought is entirely different. Ah, the time between. Perhaps they tend the fire. Perhaps they lie quietly in the darkness, feeling the warmth of the people sleeping nearby, and allow their thoughts to drift without demanding anything of them. After some time, sleep returns. It always does. The difference between these two experiences is not about the quality of the sleep itself. The waking period is the same in both cases. The difference is entirely in the meaning assigned to it. Medieval insomnia treatment, at its most sophisticated, included an element that modern cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia now calls sleep restriction and cognitive restructuring. Which is to say, the physician helped the patient understand that waking in the night was not evidence of broken sleep. It was a normal stage of the natural sleep cycle, removing the fear of waking often by itself reduced the severity of insomnia dramatically. This was the second forgotten cure. Not a herb, not a preparation, an understanding. Your body is not broken, it is confused, and there is a difference. Modern sleep researchers who study segmented sleep have conducted experiments in which subjects are removed from artificial light and allowed to sleep on natural cycles. After several weeks, most subjects spontaneously develop a two-phase sleep pattern, falling asleep earlier, waking for a calm, alert period around midnight, then returning to sleep until dawn. The midnight waking period is characterized by elevated levels of prolactin, a hormone associated with calm, well-being, and a sense of peaceful alertness. Subjects in these studies often describe the midnight waking as pleasant. Some describe it as the most alert and clear-headed they have ever felt at night. None of them describe it as distressing, because they had been told, before the experiment began, that it was normal. The medieval physician gave his patients the same information, 500 years before the sleep lab. You are lying in a medieval sleeping chamber now. The fire has burned low. The room is lit only by the faint glow of coals. The darkness is complete and gentle. You have been asleep. You are awake now. A voice somewhere in your memory, Marjorie's voice, tells you that this is not a problem. This is the between time, the time that belongs to no one and everyone. Let the thoughts drift if they will. Tend the fire if you need. Return to sleep when the body is ready. It always is. The room around you is quiet, but alive. Somewhere in the darkness, someone else is also awake. A soft movement. A breath that shifts slightly. No one speaks. No one is alarmed. The coals breathe their dim red light. Your body, released from the anxiety of wakefulness, sinks back into the mattress. Sleep comes again. It comes the way the tide comes in. Not rushed, not forced, simply inevitable. There is a document from the household accounts of a 14th century English manor that lists, among its regular winter expenses, a significant quantity of firewood designated specifically for heating water. Not cooking water, not laundry water, bathing water. The entry specifies that this water was used for the evening bath of the household's lord and certain members of his family. The bath was taken, the accounts note, approximately 2 hours before the household retired for the night. This was not an unusual luxury. Archaeological evidence of bathing facilities has been found at medieval sites across Europe, not only in grand castles but in urban bathhouses that served ordinary townspeople. Medieval people bathed more regularly than their reputation suggests, and the timing of the evening bath appears in numerous household records with a consistency that suggests deliberate practice rather than convenience. 2 hours before sleep. Modern sleep science has identified precisely this interval as optimal. Here is how it works. Your core body temperature follows a natural daily rhythm. It rises during the day, peaks in the late afternoon, and then begins to fall as evening approaches. This drop in core temperature is one of the primary triggers for the release of melatonin and the onset of sleep. The body cannot sleep effectively when its core temperature is high. It needs to cool. A warm bath raises core temperature slightly. But when you exit the warm water, your body responds to the temperature difference by releasing heat more rapidly than it otherwise would. Heat rushes to the surface of the skin. The blood vessels dilate. Core temperature drops faster and more significantly than it would have without the bath. The result is that a warm bath taken approximately 90 minutes to 2 hours before sleep can actually accelerate the natural temperature drop. bringing sleep onset forward and deepening early sleep stages. This effect has been documented in multiple clinical studies. A meta-analysis published in the journal Sleep Medicine Reviews in 2019 analyzed data from 13 randomized trials and found that warm bathing in the evening significantly improved sleep quality, reduced time to fall asleep, and increased the proportion of slow-wave sleep, the deepest and most physically restorative sleep stage. The medieval physician had observed this effect empirically through generations of watching patients, noting what helped and what did not. He had no theory for it. He would have explained it in terms of humoral medicine. The bath opens the pores. The heat warms the humors. The subsequent cooling induces the dampness and relaxation that the body seeks before sleep. The mechanism was wrong. The observation was right. The medieval bath was not a quick shower. It was an event. A wooden tub, large enough to sit in, sometimes large enough for 2 people, would be carried into a room near the fire and filled with water, heated in large cauldrons. Herbs were often added to the water. Rosemary for the smell, lavender for its calming properties, sometimes chamomile flowers, drifting on the surface of the steaming water like small white stars. The smell of a medieval herbal bath, if you could step into one, would be remarkable. The steam carrying the fragrance of herbs into the air, mingling with the wood smoke from the fire, creating something that was both medicinal and deeply pleasant. Attendants would pour warm water over the bather's shoulders and back. The heat worked through the muscles slowly, releasing tension in layers. By the time the bath was finished, the body was not merely clean. It was deeply, thoroughly relaxed. And then, the crucial part, the boiler would move to bed. The transition was deliberate. Warm water, cool air. The drop in temperature signaled to the body that the preparation for sleep was complete. The herbs still faintly present on the skin, the muscles loose. The mind, washed clean of the day's accumulated concerns. A curious detail appears in a 13th century Italian medical text by the physician Aldebrandon of Siena. He writes specifically about the use of warm baths to treat insomnia, not as a general comfort measure, as a targeted medical intervention. He advises his patients to take the bath in a room that has been moderately warmed by a fire, not too hot, not too cold, and to spend approximately the time it takes to recite a long prayer immersed in the water. He recommends adding specific herbs to the water, depending on the cause of the sleeplessness. If the insomnia arises from excessive worry, he recommends linden flowers and lavender. If it arises from pain or physical tension, he recommends rosemary and chamomile. If it arises from cold and stiffness of the body, he recommends adding a small amount of wine to the bath water. After the bath, he advises a small warm drink, diluted wine with honey and a pinch of spices, and immediate retirement to bed. He claims that this treatment, followed consistently over 7 nights, will resolve most cases of insomnia. Modern sleep researchers who have studied evening bathing protocols would recognize this prescription almost word for word. You step out of the imagined bath now. The air in the room is cool against your skin. Your arms and legs carry the faint flush of the warm water still. You can feel your heartbeat, steady and slow, in your fingertips. The herbs on your skin release their last warmth into the air around you. A servant wraps a large piece of linen around your shoulders. It is rough, but warm. You move toward the sleeping chamber. The floor is cold under your feet. but you barely notice. Your body is already turning its attention inward. The bed is made. The curtains have been drawn to trap whatever warmth remains in the air. Someone has laid a stone, heated in the coals and wrapped in wool, near the foot of the mattress. You slide beneath the covers. The body, which has been warm and is now cooling, recognizes this moment. This is the signal it was waiting for. Temperature drops. Melatonin begins to flow. Sleep arrives within minutes. There was no such thing as a switch in the medieval world. When you wanted darkness, you extinguished a candle. When you wanted light, you lit one. Light was not automatic. It was not ambient. It was not constant. It was a decision made deliberately, and it came with a cost. In candles or oil or firewood, that meant people thought carefully about when they used it and when they did not. The result was that medieval evenings involved a natural, gradual dimming of light that began hours before sleep. This is the fourth forgotten cure, and in many ways, it may be the most important one for the modern world. Here is a mainstream historical fact that has become central to modern sleep medicine. The human eye contains specialized photoreceptors called intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells, IPRGCs for short, that detect light and communicate directly with the suprachiasmatic nucleus, the brain's master clock. These cells are particularly sensitive to a specific wavelength of light, the blue spectrum light that is characteristic of daylight. When these cells detect blue spectrum light in the evening, they send a signal to the brain that suppresses melatonin production. The brain interprets the blue light as a sign that it is still daytime. Sleep is delayed. The circadian clock is pushed forward. Modern LED lighting, computer screens, smartphone screens, and tablet displays all produce light that is heavy in the blue spectrum. And most people in the modern world are exposed to this light until minutes before they attempt to fall asleep. The medieval world produced light from fire. Fire produces light that is heavily concentrated in the orange and red spectrum, the warm end of the visible light range. Orange and red light does not suppress melatonin production. The brain interprets it correctly as late evening, as the time to wind down, as a signal that darkness is coming. When a medieval family sat around the hearth in the evening, watching the fire, listening to stories, the light they were receiving was actually promoting melatonin production rather than suppressing it. Their bodies were being prepared for sleep by the very act of sitting in firelight. There is a curious detail recorded in several surviving medieval household management guides. They specify that the large central fire in the hall should be allowed to burn down in the evening rather than being fed more fuel, not only for the practical reason of conserving wood, but because the dimming of the hall was understood as a signal to the household that the day was ending. The physical dimming of the light was a communal cue, a social agreement. As the light fades, the day fades with it. Medieval communities were remarkably synchronized in their approach to evening. Work stopped at dusk. The dimming fire gathered people together. Stories were told. Simple tasks were completed. And then, as the fire burned low and the candles guttered, the household would move towards sleep. The transition was never abrupt. It was hours long. The body had time, real time, to shift gradually from the alertness of the day to the drowsiness of approaching sleep. Melatonin built slowly and steadily, unhurried. By the time a medieval person lay down on their sleeping platform, Their body had been preparing for sleep for 3 hours. Consider a woman named Isabel, a merchant's wife in a prosperous household in 14th century Bruges. Archaeological records from similar households in the Low Countries give us a vivid picture of how her evenings unfolded. In the early evening, the hall is lit by the large central hearth and by several candles placed at the table where the family takes their supper. The light is adequate. Faces are clear. Conversation is easy. As the meal ends, the hall begins to dim. The large fire is not fed again. The candles at the dining table are extinguished one by one as they burn down. The fire banks to coals. The family moves to the smaller sitting area near the hearth. Here, perhaps 2 candles burn, and the firelight does most of the work. The conversation grows quieter. Someone produces embroidery or knitting that can be done by feel as much as by sight. Someone else reads aloud, a story, a passage from scripture, a letter received that day. An hour passes. 2. The candles have burned out. The fire is dim coals. The room is warm and almost dark, and everyone in the room is, without effort or intention, sleepy. Not from boredom, from biology. Their melatonin levels, building for hours in the amber and orange firelight, have reached their natural peak. Their core body temperature has been dropping for the last hour. Their muscles have settled. Their thoughts have slowed. Isabel does not have to try to fall asleep. She simply stops resisting the sleep that is already there. The medieval cure for insomnia that arose from this practice was not a prescription. It was an environment. Physicians of the period understood, in their own terms, that harsh, bright light in the evening was harmful to sleep. Trotula, the famous 12th century medical text concerned with women's health, advises that patients suffering from sleeplessness should avoid working by lamplight in the late hours. Bright artificial light, the text argues, agitates the spirits and prevents the body from arriving at the calm it needs for rest. The recommendation was entirely practical. If you cannot sleep, stop flooding yourself with artificial light after dark. The medieval world enforced this recommendation automatically through the simple expense and inconvenience of artificial light. Modern people must choose to enforce it themselves, but the cure is the same. Dim the light, long before bed. Let the evening grow soft and warm and amber. Let the body read the signal that it evolved over millions of years to read. Darkness is coming. Rest. You are in Isabel's house now, in the final hour before sleep. The fire is almost out. 1 candle has been left burning near the stairs. A safety measure. A guide through the dark. Its flame is tiny. The room breathes in orange and shadow. You are sitting in a chair near what remains of the fire's warmth. Someone beside you is speaking quietly about something small and unhurried. The words drift past without demanding attention. Your hands lie still in your lap. Your eyes feel heavy, not from exhaustion, from the simple accumulation of darkness. The body is doing what it has always done, what it was designed to do. It is preparing to rest, and you are letting it. In the medieval household, the transition from evening to sleep was almost never made in silence. It was made through stories. Someone told them. Someone listened. The stories were not complex or demanding. They did not require analysis or response. They unfolded slowly, in a voice suited to the dimming light, low, warm, unhurried. This practice was so universal across medieval European culture that it barely merits comment in the historical record. It simply was. Everywhere, in every kind of household, the evening story, told by firelight, before sleep. And it turns out that this too was medicine, a mainstream historical fact about how the brain works at night. In the hours before sleep, the brain undergoes a gradual transition from what neuroscientists call the default mode network, the state of active, self-referential thought that characterizes waking life, to the more passive, diffuse states that precede sleep. During this transition, the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for planning, problem-solving, and the anxious rehearsal of future events, needs to reduce its activity. The amygdala, which processes emotion and threat, needs to down-regulate. These processes happen naturally, given the right conditions. The problem is that modern evening environments often prevent them. Screens demand active visual attention. Interactive media requires responses. News is designed to activate the threat detection system. Even reading, if it is sufficiently demanding, can maintain the prefrontal cortex in an active state that delays sleep onset. Listening to a story is different. Passive listening, in which you receive information without needing to respond, analyze, or act, is one of the most effective ways to allow the prefrontal cortex to begin its evening wind-down. The story provides enough content to occupy the mind, preventing it from looping through anxious thoughts. But it does not demand the active engagement that keeps the brain alert. It is, neurologically speaking, the perfect pre-sleep activity. And the medieval world practiced it every night. A curious detail from the history of medieval storytelling. The stories that were told in the evenings were often specifically chosen for their qualities. Not adventure. Adventure activates the sympathetic nervous system, raises heart rate, sharpens attention, produces the hormonal responses associated with alertness and engagement. The stories chosen for evening were long, slow, detailed, wandering, rich in description, light on conflict. They moved through landscapes and seasons and the texture of daily life. They accumulated detail without urgency. This is a form of storytelling that has almost disappeared from the modern world. We tell stories for excitement, for tension, for the satisfying resolution of a problem. We optimize stories for engagement, which means we make them more activating, not less. The medieval evening story was optimized for the opposite, for the gradual loosening of the mind, for the gentle slide from attention into something softer. It worked the way a slow river works. You enter it, meaning to stay upright, and find yourself floating without quite noticing when it happened. Historians still debate exactly what kinds of stories were told in ordinary medieval households. The great sagas and chansons de geste that survive from the period were certainly performed, but they were public entertainment, meant for daylight hours and full attention. For the private evening, the evidence suggests something different. Folklore, local stories, the retelling of familiar tales that offered comfort through their predictability. Stories where you already knew how they ended and could let the telling wash over you without suspense. This predictability was part of the medicine. The known story does not activate the curiosity that keeps the mind alert. It soothes with its familiarity. It is a map you have traveled before and can travel now with your eyes half closed. Some medieval medical writers actually prescribed storytelling directly. The 12th century Arabic-influenced physician Constantinus Africanus, whose translations of Arabic medical texts were enormously influential in European universities, writes about the treatment of vigilia with specific activities suited to the evening hours. Among them, He recommends the listening to pleasant histories and gentle tales, which he argues draw the mind away from troubled thoughts and guide it gently toward the calm that sleep requires. He understood, in his own terms, what modern neuroscience has confirmed in clinical studies. A passive narrative is one of the most effective tools for shifting the brain from wakefulness to sleep. You are sitting near the dying fire. The candle has burned low. The person telling the story has been speaking for a long time now. Their voice so familiar that you stopped consciously listening minutes ago. The words continue to arrive. They wash past. A description of a landscape. A detail about a journey. The sound of bells in a distant village. None of it demands anything from you. Your hands have relaxed in your lap. Your shoulders have dropped without you noticing. Your breathing has grown slow and even. The story continues. You are not quite asleep. You are not quite awake. You are in the place between. The place that medieval physicians understood and named and valued. The place that the herbs have opened, that the bath has prepared for, that the dimming firelight has guided you toward. The story is the last gentle hand that guides you through the door. The last of the forgotten cures is the most difficult to explain in practical terms, because it is not a substance or a ritual. It is a way of thinking. Or more precisely, it is a way of not thinking. Medieval physicians who treated insomnia spent considerable time addressing what we might today call the cognitive component of the condition. They understood, without using these words, that the way a person thinks about their sleeplessness often makes the sleeplessness worse. Ibn Sina, in his Canon of Medicine, writes that excessive anxiety about the failure to sleep creates a vicious cycle. The worry produces a heat of the mind that itself prevents rest, and the resulting sleeplessness increases the worry, which produces more heat, which prevents more rest, and so on in an escalating spiral. His treatment included what he called the quieting of the mind's agitation. This is not, he is careful to say, the same as telling someone to simply stop worrying. He knew that instruction alone was useless. The physician needed to give the patient something to replace the worry with. What he recommended, and what appears again and again in medieval medical literature, is surrender. Not passive, defeated surrender. Not the surrender of someone who has given up. The surrender of someone who has recognized that certain things cannot be controlled and has decided, deliberately and wisely, to stop trying to control them. There is a concept in medieval philosophy and theology that has no exact modern equivalent. The Latin term is acquiescer. To acquiesce, to rest in acceptance of what is. In religious terms, it was expressed as the surrendering of the night's outcome to God. The medieval Christian who could not sleep was advised not to lie awake, tormenting themselves with the failure, but to offer the wakefulness to God, to use it for prayer, for reflection, for the kind of quiet attention that daylight hours rarely permitted. This religious framing had a practical effect that was entirely independent of theology. By giving the wakefulness a purpose, by transforming it from a failure into an offering, it removed the anxiety that was making the wakefulness worse. The person who lies awake, thinking I cannot sleep, I am failing, tomorrow will be ruined, is in a state of physiological activation that makes sleep impossible. The stress hormones rise, the heart rate increases, the mind accelerates. The person who lies awake thinking this is the quiet time, I will use it gently, and sleep will return when it is ready, is in an entirely different physiological state. Relaxed, accepting, open. And from that open state, sleep can come. This principle, which modern cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia calls stimulus control and cognitive restructuring and acceptance-based approaches, is now considered the most effective non-pharmaceutical treatment for chronic insomnia. Multiple clinical trials have confirmed that it outperforms sleeping medications in long-term outcomes. And its central insight, that changing your relationship to sleeplessness rather than fighting it is the most effective cure, was articulated clearly and practiced deliberately in the medieval world. The forgotten cure was not a herb, though herbs helped. It was not a bath, though baths helped. It was not dimmed firelight or a slow story, though these helped too. The deepest forgotten cure was this: the body knows how to sleep. Your only task is to stop preventing it. Marjorie, the healer, understood this. When she sat with a patient who could not sleep, she listened carefully to the anxiety that surrounded the sleeplessness, often as damaging as the sleeplessness itself. And she offered something that no herb could provide: a framework. The night is long, she would say, and the body is wise. Your task is not to force sleep to come. Your task is to prepare the conditions in which it can arrive, and then to wait, without fear, for it to do so. It will. It always does. This was not false reassurance. It was the deepest truth she knew about sleep. And it is the same truth that sleep researchers, after decades of clinical research, have arrived at from the opposite direction. Stop fighting the night. The night is not your enemy. It never was. The study of the medieval physician is quiet now. The candle on the table has burned almost to nothing. Outside the window, the darkness is complete and still. A dog barks once somewhere in the town below, and then falls silent. The night settles into itself. On the page in front of us, the old prescription for insomnia stands complete. The first cure. The herbs. Valerian root, steeped with hops and chamomile and linden flowers, in warm water, sweetened with honey. The body's chemistry responding to compounds that have always spoken to it in the language of rest. The second cure. The understanding that the two-part sleep is natural, that waking in the night is not failure, that the body moves through the dark in its own rhythm, and the rhythm is trustworthy. The third cure. The bath. Warm water, taken 2 hours before sleep, drawing the heat from the body's core, and accelerating the natural cooling that signals sleep to begin. The fourth cure. The light. The long, slow dimming of the evening. Firelight and amber, and the gradual retreat of brightness, allowing melatonin to build undisturbed for hours before the body needs it. The fifth cure. The story. The slow, unhurried narrative that occupied the mind without demanding it, guiding the prefrontal cortex down from its evening heights toward the softer ground where sleep lives. The sixth cure. The acceptance. The deliberate choice to stop fighting the night, to offer wakefulness if it comes, back to the darkness without fear, to trust that sleep will return, as it always has, as it always will. These were not secrets. They were simply knowledge. Ordinary, inherited, practiced knowledge that moved from healer to patient, from elder to child, from one generation to the next, across centuries. And then it was lost. Not all at once. Slowly. As the electric lights came and the natural darkness was pushed back. As the industrial schedule compressed the long medieval nights into calculated windows. As pharmaceutical medicine offered faster solutions, and the slower wisdom was set aside. But it was never destroyed. It was only forgotten. And you have found it again tonight. Let the story grow quieter now. Let the page of the old manuscript blur and soften at the edges. You have been carrying the weight of the day for a long time. You have been fighting, perhaps, a sleep that does not need to be fought. You have been waiting, perhaps, for permission that has always been yours to give. Here is the permission. The herbs have done their quiet work. The cooling of the room is your ally, not your enemy. The darkness that surrounds you is not absence. It is invitation. And the story that has carried you this far is still here, still moving, slow and unhurried and warm. Your body is not broken. It is wise. And it knows, it has always known, exactly what to do. All it needs is for you to stop preventing it. Let your hands be heavy now. Let your shoulders find the mattress. Let the breath slow to its own rhythm, the one it knows without being told. The medieval physician closes his book. The candle goes out. The darkness is complete and gentle and generous. And sleep, the real thing, the deep thing, the thing your body has been preparing for across this entire long evening, is already here. It was always here, waiting, the way the tide waits, the way morning waits, with the patient certainty of something that cannot be rushed and cannot be prevented, only welcomed. Welcome it now. Let go and sleep.